The train screeched to a halt, its whistle howling into the frozen Wyoming wind. Snowflakes danced like ghosts around the iron beast as steam hissed from its sides. Mary Lou stepped onto the platform, her boots crunching against the ice-laced planks. She clutched her small bag close to her chest, fingers red and stiff from the cold, eyes scanning the unfamiliar town. Her heart beat with cautious hope. Her world was soundless, but not silent. The thump of her pulse, the whistle of wind brushing her face, the tremor of the ground as the train pulled away. She felt everything. It was a language all its own. She had learned to read lips, gestures, the shifting light in someone's eyes. Since the fever that stole her hearing at 12, she'd lived in a world built on observation. People stared as she walked toward the general store, the place where she was told her husband-to-be would be waiting. A tall man with a thick brown coat leaned against the hitching post, his boots polished, hat tilted just enough to shade a scowl. That had to be Edgar Thorne. He was taller than she imagined, older too, with a trimmed beard and eyes sharp as broken glass. Mary Lou paused just a breath away, smoothing her dark wool dress and smiling. She held up her hand and waved once, a simple, elegant gesture that said, "Hello, I'm here, I'm ready." Edgar's eyes narrowed. His lips moved fast, but she couldn't catch all the words. She tilted her head, pointed to her ear, then to her lips. Her practiced gesture. Most folks understood it quick enough. Some even tried to be kind. He stepped forward, voice raised, slow and deliberate. "You're deaf?" She nodded once, her smile faltering. She tried to hand him the letter he'd written her, the one promising warmth, companionship, a fresh start, the one she clung to on the long journey from Missouri. He glanced at it like it was filth. "You didn't say that in your letter." She shook her head gently, pulled out her reply to show she had. She'd written it clearly. "I lost my hearing at 12. I read lips. I can still be a good wife. I can still love." He took the letter, read one line, then crumpled it in his fist and threw it onto the street. "You think a man like me's gonna marry a girl who can't hear a damn thing? What if I yell during a fire? What if I talk and you just stare at me like a dumb cow?" Laughter pealed from behind him. Two men leaned against the railing, spit trailing from their lips as they chuckled. One of them nudged the other and said something crude, and both howled like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. Mary Lou's cheeks burned. She stood her ground, though her knees wanted to buckle. Her fingers clenched tighter around her bag. Edgar was still talking, still throwing words she didn't need to hear to understand. The curl of his lip, the flick of his hand, when he turned away, it said everything. "Go find some deaf-mute preacher to marry you," he barked. "You're not my problem." Then came the worst moment. He picked up her carpet bag, her only possession besides her letters and a single locket, and tossed it. It landed in a patch of slush and mud. Mary Lou didn't move. She stared at the bag, then at the man who had invited her here with honeyed words and broken every one of them with a single cruel act. No one helped her. The town buzzed with whispers. A few women in bonnets peeked from behind curtains. A shopkeeper watched from the steps, but no one came forward. No one met her eyes. She bent slowly, picked up her bag with shaking fingers, and brushed the snow away. Her shoulders were squared when she stood again. She didn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She turned and walked. She didn't know where she was going. Only away. Away from the laughter, the betrayal, the bitter taste of disappointment that clung to her tongue even though she hadn't spoken a word. Her boots sank into the snow as she left the edge of town and headed toward the hills where a patch of woods stood dark against the gray sky. She didn't look back. Every step felt heavier than the last, her bag growing heavier, the cold biting deeper. But she walked. The sky darkened. The wind rose. Her fingers stung with numbness, and her lips were cracked from breathing cold air. Still she kept moving. One step, then another. The road was empty. No wagons, no riders, just snow and silence. The wind shrieked through the trees. Branches creaked and snapped above her. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stumbled forward. There was no inn, no barn, no fire waiting. Just cold and white and the unrelenting weight of rejection. Her knees buckled. She fell into the snow with a muffled grunt. The bag slipped from her hands. her breath catching in short bursts. She tried to rise, but her legs didn't answer. The cold had sunk into her bones. She lay there, face pressed to the frozen ground, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Tears slipped down her cheeks, vanishing into the snow. Not from weakness, but from heartbreak. She had come here willing to give everything she had. She had risked what little dignity remained in hopes of building a life, finding love, being seen. And now, she was no one. Alone in the wild with only a bag of letters and a body growing colder by the minute. Then the snow crunched nearby. A shadow moved through the trees. She didn't see the rider at first, but she felt the vibration of hooves. A horse. Closer. Then a voice, low, sharp. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized concern. Urgency. Boots hit the snow. Strong hands touched her shoulders, gently lifting her. She flinched, breath caught in her throat. The stranger's face came into view. Broad-jawed, sun-worn, eyes like tarnished silver. His mouth moved slowly. He repeated the same word over and over. She couldn't hear it, but she saw his lips, cold. Cold. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Warmth. The scent of horses, leather, wood smoke clung to him. She blinked through the snow, clinging to her lashes as the world blurred. As he placed her in the saddle before him and pulled a thick coat around them both, she caught the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. Not of who she was, but what she was. Someone in need. She rested her head against his chest. Her hands clutched the saddle horn, but her heart, bruised and frozen, felt something stir. A single thought bloomed in the quiet dark of her mind. Maybe not everyone turns away. The horse galloped into the storm. Behind them, the town and its cruelty faded into the snow. The snow fell harder as the horse thundered across the frozen clearing, hooves cutting deep into the white crust. Jack Colton leaned forward, his arms tight around the half-conscious woman in front of him. She was trembling beneath his coat, her head lolling against his shoulder. He could feel her weight shifting with every jolt, too light, too still. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough women abandoned to know the shape of the story. A carpet bag and a dress meant for impressing. A face too proud to beg and too worn to lie. The mail-order bride trade brought more heartbreak than hope to these hills. He pulled the horse to a halt at the edge of his homestead. A small, crooked cabin huddled beneath a canopy of pine trees, its chimney puffing smoke into the slate sky. A rough barn stood nearby, doors swinging in the wind. Jack slid down first, boots crunching as he landed. He caught her before she could slump from the saddle, then carried her toward the porch like he had once carried his wife. Only now, there was no joy in the moment. Inside, the warmth of the fire hit them like a wave. Jack set her gently down on the bearskin rug beside the hearth, pulling off his coat and wrapping it tighter around her. He grabbed a quilt from the rocker and tucked it around her legs, then reached for a kettle simmering over the flames. Steam rose as he poured a cup and offered it to her. She blinked slowly, dazed but aware. Her hands moved carefully, curling around the cup. She drank, and the color began to return to her face. Jack sat beside her, watching. He noticed the subtle way she turned her head toward the fire, how her eyes darted to his lips when he spoke. "You hurt?" She stared, eyes narrowing slightly. "I said, are you hurt?" He spoke slower, louder. Still, no reply. Then she raised her hand and pointed to her ear, then to her mouth, and shook her head. Understanding clicked into place. "Deaf. Well, hell," he muttered. "No wonder you didn't scream when I found you." She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached in her bag and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was worn, creased in dozens of places. She offered it to him. He took it, unfolding it slowly. Her handwriting was small and neat. "My name is Mary Lou. I am deaf, but I read lips well. I can sign, write, and speak a little. I was meant to be married in town, but the man rejected me when he saw I couldn't hear." Jack read the words twice. He looked at her again, her face pale, eyes steady. "Well, Mary Lou," he said, tapping the paper, "that's a damn shame. But you're here now, and I reckon you'll be safe with me a while." She didn't smile, not yet. but her shoulders dropped slightly, the first sign of release. A child's footsteps thudded on the stairs. A small girl appeared, hair wild, a stuffed rabbit clutched in one arm. She paused when she saw Mary Lou, her wide eyes curious and unafraid. "Who's that?" the girl asked, voice high and sleepy. "That's Mary Lou," Jack said. "She can't hear, so you'll have to be real clear when you talk." The girl tiptoed closer, then waved a tiny hand in a slow arc. Mary Lou returned the wave, a soft smile finally blooming. "I'm Sarah," the girl whispered, crawling close to her. Mary Lou pointed to her own chest, then slowly signed her name with graceful, practiced hands. Sarah gasped. "What's that?" "She's spelling her name," Jack said. "With her hands. It's called sign language. Can I learn?" Mary Lou nodded once. Then she took Sarah's small hand and gently shaped her fingers into the sign 4S. A thud came from the loft above. A boy, maybe 8, slid down the ladder with the lazy confidence of someone who lived half in the trees. He paused at the bottom, eyeing Mary Lou with the protective suspicion only older brothers could muster. Jack stood. "That's Thomas. He's quiet most of the time, like his old man." Mary Lou met the boy's stare evenly. He gave a small nod, then dropped onto a bench near the fire. Jack turned back to her. "You're welcome to stay, long as you need." She pulled her notebook out again and scribbled something, then held it out. "I don't want to be a burden." Jack frowned. "You save yourself from freezing to death. That ain't a burden. That's survival." She watched him carefully, and something in her softened. Not quite trust, but a thread of it. That night, Mary Lou helped prepare supper. She moved with quiet efficiency, sleeves rolled up, chopping onions while the children watched her fingers dance through signs they couldn't yet understand. She wrote down ingredients, let Sarah stir the stew, and even coaxed a reluctant smile from Thomas with a piece of dried apple. Jack watched from the corner. He hadn't seen his children laugh like that in months. After the dishes were done, Mary Lou sat by the fire with her notebook. She drew something, small, steady lines, and passed the page to Jack. It was a picture of the cabin, the fireplace, the table, even the shape of his boots by the door. She'd captured it perfectly. "You're an artist," he said, genuinely impressed. She shrugged modestly, then wrote, "I watch. I remember. I see what people miss." He looked at her for a long time. She wasn't just a woman down on her luck. There was steel in her spine and intelligence in every glance. The man who turned her away had been a fool. Thunder rumbled outside. Jack stood to check the windows, making sure the shutters were secure. The wind howled across the hills, whistling between the boards. He poured 2 more cups of coffee, handed one to Mary Lou, and sat back down. "You got any people waiting for you?" She shook her head. "No one." She signed something he didn't understand. Then, slowly, deliberately, she mimed picking up a letter, reading it, looking hopeful. Then her face fell. She pointed to the window, to the storm. Jack sat quiet for a while, sipping his drink. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone here," he said finally. "Just be who you are." She glanced at him, eyes shining in the firelight. Then Sarah climbed into Mary Lou's lap, the rabbit still tucked under one arm. She didn't speak, just rested her head on Mary Lou's chest and closed her eyes. Mary Lou froze, unsure, then wrapped her arms gently around the girl. Her expression shifted, uncertainty turning to warmth. She closed her eyes too, just for a moment, and let her body relax. Jack watched the scene in silence. A stranger had walked into their lives, broken and discarded. And now, already, she was part of the firelight, the quiet, the safety of the room. Outside, the storm raged. But inside, something small and fragile began to grow. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, he let himself believe in second chances. A brittle crack echoed outside the cabin, sharp and sudden. Jack froze at the table, spoon midway to his mouth. Mary Lou looked up from the stew she was ladling into bowls, her eyes catching the flicker of tension in his shoulders. She didn't hear the sound, but she saw the stillness it carved into him. "Stay here," he mouthed. She nodded, clutching Sarah closer on the bench beside her. The girl didn't ask questions. She only squeezed her stuffed rabbit tighter and stared at the door. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing the rifle from the wall. He paused at the window, carefully drawing back the curtain. Snow fell in lazy flakes now, soft and deceptive, blanketing the landscape in innocence. But out near the edge of the tree line, he saw it. Movement. 3 figures on horseback, shadows against the fading light. One of them leaned too far in the saddle, whiskey-drunken sway unmistakable. They weren't hunters. They weren't neighbors. They were looking for something or someone. Jack opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching against the ice-packed ground. The wind bit at his face as the riders approached. One he recognized instantly. Edgar Thorne, the man with too much pride and not enough heart. The same bastard who'd left Mary Lou in the snow. "Evening, Colton," Edgar called, reining in just outside the fence. "Heard you took an astray." Jack kept the rifle resting across his arms, not aiming it but not lowering it either. "What's it to you?" Edgar's lip curled. "She was meant to be mine. Sign a contract and everything. Then she tried to humiliate me in front of half the damn town. Told everyone I turned her out." Jack didn't move. "Far as I saw, you humiliated yourself." One of the riders shifted uneasily. The other just smirked, gloved fingers tapping the butt of a pistol at his hip. Edgar spat into the snow. "I came to collect what's mine. She's not your problem, Jack. Don't make her one." Jack's grip tightened on the rifle. "She's under my roof. She's my business now." A long pause hung in the air like frost, sharp and waiting. Edgar leaned forward. "You planning to marry her, then? Take a deaf woman to your bed? What kind of life is that?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. Edgar scoffed. "You always were a fool for lost causes. Guess you'll learn the hard way." He turned his horse with a sharp yank of the reins. The others followed. Snow churned under hooves as they rode back into the dusk, vanishing into the woods like smoke on the wind. Jack stayed outside for a long while, watching, listening. When he finally returned to the cabin, his face was stone. Mary Lou met his eyes as soon as he stepped in. Her notebook was already in her hands. She passed it to him. "It's Edgar. I saw his shape. He wants to punish me for embarrassing him. I shouldn't have stayed." He read it, then looked up. "This ain't on you. That man's poison. Always has been." She scribbled again, faster this time. "You have children. A home. I won't let him ruin that. I can leave in the morning." Jack shook his head. "You think I'd let you walk out there alone? After all this? That man leaves bruises in his wake. I'm not about to send you back into his storm." She stared at him, throat tight. Her hand hovered above the paper, but she didn't write. Instead, she walked to the fireplace, knelt beside it, and stirred the coals, watching sparks lift into the air. Jack moved beside her, slowly. The children were asleep upstairs, their soft breathing the only sound beyond the fire's crackle. He sat down across from her, the rifle resting against the wall. "My wife used to do that," he said quietly. "Sit right there, with her hands near the fire. She'd warm up her fingers before she started sewing. Said it made the needle less cruel." Mary Lou watched his mouth, taking in every syllable. "I lost her to fever 2 winters ago. Fast. Too fast. Took me months to realize she wasn't coming back, even after she was buried." He swallowed, gazed distant. She was the kind of woman who filled a room just by being in it. Not loud, not demanding. Just full. I didn't know how quiet the world could be until she was gone. He looked at Mary Lou again. "I thought the silence would kill me. But you live in silence and still manage to bring warmth into this place." She lowered her gaze, heart pounding. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. His voice dropped even softer. "I don't care that you can't hear, Mary Lou. You listen better than anyone I've met. You see things, feel things. You understand what most men never even notice." She looked up, eyes full and shining, lips parted. Then she took her notebook and, with steady hands, wrote only 3 words. "You see me." He nodded. "I do." A silence fell between them again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of things unsaid, waiting. Then footsteps padded softly from above. Sarah appeared, rubbing her eyes. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Mary Lou reached out, arms open. The little girl crossed the room without hesitation and curled into her lap. Mary Lou brushed the hair from her face and rocked her gently, humming, soft, breathy. She couldn't hear her own voice, but the rhythm was tender, steady. It worked. Sarah's eyes closed once more. Jack watched, throat tight. He hadn't imagined this, any of it. And yet here it was, a deaf woman holding his daughter, protecting her as if she'd always belonged. A woman he barely knew, yet already trusted with everything. Mary Lou looked up, and he saw the question in her eyes. What now? What happens when the morning comes? He didn't answer aloud. Instead, he took her hand again. Outside, wind rattled the window shutters. Trouble was still out there, circling like wolves in the trees. But inside, they were building something stronger than fear. Snow glinted like broken glass in the early morning light. Jack stood at the chopping block, axe in hand, working through a frozen log with sharp, rhythmic strikes. Each swing sent a tremor through the brittle air, but his mind wasn't on firewood. It was on the man who might be riding toward them with a grudge sharpened into steel. Inside the cabin, Mary Lou stirred the pot on the stove, her movements calm, deliberate, though her shoulders were tight. She hadn't slept much. Neither had Jack. They hadn't spoken of Edgar since the visit, but his presence loomed in every glance toward the window, in every locked door and loaded rifle. Thomas sat near the hearth, polishing the scuffed leather of Jack's spare holster. Sarah helped Mary Lou knead dough with small, flour-dusted hands. It looked like peace, but they were all just waiting. When the first shot cracked through the air, it wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. Jack dropped the axe and reached for the rifle he'd propped against the chopping stump. From the tree line, a second shot rang out, splintering bark inches from his shoulder. "Get inside," he shouted, whether anyone could hear or not. Mary Lou had already grabbed Sarah, pulling her down behind the heavy table. Thomas crouched low beside the woodbox, eyes wide but steady. Jack burst through the door, rifle raised, scanning through the front window. 3 riders again. Edgar led them, this time with a pistol in hand and no pretense of diplomacy. Jack crouched below the sill and began checking his rounds. Mary Lou crawled over and tapped his arm. She pointed to herself, then to the back door. He shook his head, mouth firm. No. She grabbed a pencil and scribbled on the side of the woodbox with shaking hands. You can't shoot 3 men alone. He scrawled back beneath her words. I'm not letting them near the kids. She stared at him, then reached for the rifle's second strap, the spare one he'd built to train Thomas. He blinked. You ever shoot? She shook her head, then paused. Not at once. Not often. But enough. He hesitated for one breath, then strapped the backup rifle around her. It looked heavy in her arms, too large for her frame, but her stance was firm. A window shattered. Glass rained down across the floor. Jack spun and fired once, grazing the hat off one of the riders as they circled the barn. Keep the kids hidden, he barked, and charged out the front. Gunfire split the air like thunder. Jack ducked behind a wagon, firing again, driving the attackers back into cover. But they were flanking, spreading out, trying to hem him in. Then the back door creaked open. Mary Lou slipped out the side, silent as a shadow. She moved low, boots barely crunching over the snow, every step deliberate. She circled wide, keeping to the trees, just like she'd seen hunters do in Missouri. She couldn't hear the gunfire, but she saw the smoke, felt the vibration in the ground, saw the way Edgar's horse shifted when he leaned too far forward. She crouched behind a stump, breath fogging in short bursts. Edgar dismounted, pistol raised, creeping toward the house. Mary Lou lifted the rifle, braced it against her shoulder, and squeezed the trigger. The kick nearly knocked her down, but the shot rang true. Edgar cried out and spun, his leg giving beneath him. He fell into the snow, yelling curses she couldn't hear. Jack, hearing the gunshot and seeing Edgar drop, looked up in shock. Then he saw her. Mary Lou stood slowly, rifle still in hand, face pale but resolved. The other 2 men turned at the sight of their leader wounded. Jack didn't give them the chance to think. He fired again, striking one square in the arm. The second man fled, disappearing into the woods without a word. It was over in seconds. Jack rushed to Mary Lou as she lowered the rifle, her arms trembling now that the adrenaline was draining. She looked up at him, blinking through snowflakes and smoke. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face against her shoulder, holding her like she was life itself. Behind them, Edgar writhed in the snow, clutching his bleeding leg, still shouting. But the sheriff would find him soon enough. Jack had already sent a letter the day before, detailing the threats. The law was slow in these parts, but not blind. They left Edgar where he fell and walked back to the cabin together. Inside, the children ran to them. Thomas wrapped his arms around Mary Lou's waist. Sarah buried her face in her skirts. Mary Lou dropped to her knees, pulling them close, trembling for the first time. Jack knelt beside her, resting a hand on her back. "You saved us," he said slowly, knowing she would watch his lips. She shook her head, tears spilling over. "You did," he repeated. "You didn't run. You stood your ground. For me. For them." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Later, when the sheriff came and took Edgar away, moaning and cursing every step, Jack stood beside her on the porch, snow still falling around them in soft spirals. "You know," he said with a small smile, "I reckon I've been more scared today than I ever was in the war." Mary Lou smiled faintly, then tapped her heart. She signed a word he hadn't learned yet. He tilted his head. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the little notepad, writing carefully. "Brave, but not without fear. Brave is doing it anyway." He took the note, read it twice, then kissed her fingers. They said little as the sun dipped low, casting gold over the cabin roof and the trampled snow. That night, as the fire crackled low and the children slept nestled against each other, Jack sat beside Mary Lou at the hearth. He took her hand again. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said. "Not shelter, not safety, not us." She turned to him, eyes searching, and he signed slowly, clumsily, the words he'd practiced alone in the barn for nights. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a joy so full it ached. She nodded once, then leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sure. There were no vows spoken that night, no witnesses beyond the walls and wind. But in that quiet room, something loud and lasting was born, a love that didn't need words, a promise stronger than sound. In the heart of a world that once cast her out, Mary Lou had found her place. Not just in a cabin or beside a man, but within a family. A future, a voice all her own, and in the silence, she had been heard.
The year was 1865, and the frontiers stretched endlessly beneath a sky too wide to hold any promises. Dust curled in the wake of wagon wheels, whispering over the golden plains as the Dawson family pressed westward. Abigail Dawson gripped the worn wood of the wagon's side, her knuckles white with effort. The sun beat down, turning the world into a great, yawning furnace, the heat licking at the skin of those foolish enough to travel beneath its watchful eye. She had not wanted this journey. Kansas had been cruel but predictable, the wooden walls of her family's home a fragile yet familiar comfort. The West was something else entirely, a wild, untamed beast that could swallow the unprepared whole. Yet her father, filled with grand notions of land and legacy, had urged them onward. They were not alone. A train of settlers stretched behind them, a slow-moving river of hopefuls, dreamers, and desperate souls. Some sought gold, some sought freedom, and others sought only the chance to live beyond the reach of a past that haunted them. Abigail didn't know which group she belonged to. All she knew was that there was no turning back. The wind carried whispers of something unseen, something that unsettled her as much as the emptiness of the land itself. She had felt it for days now, an eerie sensation of being watched. The others dismissed her nerves, but her mother, always attuned to her daughter's moods, had placed a gentle hand on her shoulder the night before. "Keep your wits about you, Abby. This land listens more than it speaks." She had nodded, though she didn't understand. But now, as she squinted against the sun's glare, she caught sight of something on the horizon, a lone figure on horseback, distant yet undeniable. The rider sat unmoving, watching. The moment she saw him, a chill ran down her spine. He was not one of theirs. The rider lingered for only a moment longer before wheeling his horse around and vanishing beyond the hills, swallowed by the land as if he had never been there at all. Abigail exhaled, trying to shake the unease curling in her gut. It was likely nothing, just one of the many natives who lived on these lands, keeping to himself. But something told her this was different. The night fell heavy and thick, a blanket of darkness wrapping around the small encampment of settlers. A fire burned low, casting flickering shapes against the wagons. Abigail sat with her family, listening to the murmur of voices and the occasional call of a night bird. The feeling of being watched had not left her. She did not sleep. When the attack came, it came without warning. Gunfire shattered the night, sharp cracks that sent men scrambling for weapons and women screaming for their children. The air filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder, the metallic bite of blood. Horses reared, wagons overturned, and chaos swallowed the camp in an instant. Abigail's father shoved her toward the wagon. "Run, Abby! Get to cover!" Her feet refused to move, frozen as she watched shadows dart between the fires, figures that did not belong to the night. Men, ragged and vicious, their faces twisted with greed. These were not warriors protecting their land. These were scavengers, vultures that thrived on the weak and unsuspecting. Someone grabbed her arm. She turned with a cry, her heart hammering, but it was her mother, eyes wild. "Go!" The world spun as hands shoved her forward. Her legs finally obeyed, carrying her toward the shelter of the overturned wagon. She dropped to the ground, her breath ragged. From her hiding place, she saw her father raise his rifle, fire, and then crumple like a puppet with cut strings. Her scream died in her throat. Tears burned hot trails down her cheeks, but she forced herself to stay silent. Around her, the carnage unfolded, bodies fell, wagons burned, and the night swallowed all certainty. She did not know how long she stayed curled beneath the broken wood, trembling as footsteps stomped past her. Then, silence. The attack had passed, but it had taken everything with it. Abigail crawled out from the wreckage, her fingers shaking as they touched the ground slick with blood. Fires still burned, casting grotesque shadows over the remains of the camp. The smell of death thickened the air. She staggered to her feet, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. A sound made her turn, a rustling in the darkness, the soft tread of hooves. She reached for the knife at her belt, though she knew it would do little against whatever came next. The figure stepped into the firelight, and her grip faltered. It was him. The rider from the hills. He was Cheyenne, that much was clear, the careful beadwork on his buckskin clothing, the long black hair tied back from a face carved from stone. His eyes, dark as the void between the stars, locked onto hers. There was no threat in them, yet no kindness either. Abigail's chest rose and fell in short, sharp gasps. Were you? The words failed her. He shook his head once, slow. Then he turned his gaze to the bodies scattered around them, his expression unreadable. More figures emerged from the night, moving with silent purpose. Cheyenne warriors, their faces grave as they surveyed the scene. They had not been the attackers, but they were here now, drawn to the scent of spilled blood. Abigail took a step back, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had heard stories of what happened to white women taken by native warriors, and though she did not know if they were true, she had no intention of finding out. The man before her studied her for a long moment, then spoke. "You are alone." The statement was simple, yet it cut through her like a blade. She swallowed hard. "Yes." He glanced toward the horizon, where dawn's first light bled into the sky. Then he nodded once more, as if making a decision. "You will come with me." Her body stiffened. "No, I can't. You will not survive here." His voice was calm, but there was something final in it, something that left no room for argument. She hesitated, the weight of the night pressing down on her. He was right. The outlaws might return. The wilderness would swallow her whole. She had no food, no weapons beyond her pitiful knife. Still, her lips parted to refuse. Then she looked at the bodies again. At her father, lying cold beneath the dawn. At the nothingness that stretched before her. And she nodded. The man turned without another word, leading his horse forward. One of his warriors helped her onto another. She did not look back. As they rode into the breaking dawn, the wind carried the last whispers of smoke from the ruined camp, curling into the sky like ghosts of the lost. The ride stretched long into the morning, the endless plains swallowing them whole. Abigail's fingers curled around the reins of the unfamiliar horse, her knuckles white from the strain of balance and fear. The man who had taken her, or saved her, rode ahead, silent as the wind, his dark hair lifting with each gust. The other warriors trailed behind, speaking in low voices, their expressions unreadable. She had no idea where they were going. Each passing mile pulled her farther from everything she had ever known. The burning wreckage of her past lay behind her, and before her, only uncertainty. Her body ached from the unrelenting motion of the horse, her skirts stiff with dried blood and dust. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but she did not ask for food. Her throat was parched, lips cracked from the wind, but she did not ask for water. She would not let them see her as weak. By midday, they reached the shelter of a narrow ravine, where a thin stream cut through the rocks like a silver scar. The warriors dismounted, moving with quiet efficiency, and she followed their lead, slipping from the saddle with shaking legs. Her knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to remain upright. She would not fall. The Cheyenne chief, she knew now that he was a leader among them, approached her. His gaze swept over her, assessing, unreadable as ever. "Drink," he said, motioning toward the stream. She hesitated. Not because she distrusted the water, but because she distrusted everything else. Was she his prisoner? His burden? His responsibility? She didn't know, and she wasn't sure which answer would frighten her more. But thirst won out over stubbornness. She knelt at the water's edge, cupping the cool liquid in trembling hands and drinking deep. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. The men moved around her, tending to their horses, speaking to each other in a language she could not understand. She felt their eyes on her, some curious, some wary. She was an outsider in every possible way. When she finally pulled away from the water, the chief was still watching her. "What is your name?" His voice was low, steady. She swallowed hard. "Abigail." He nodded. "I am Chayton." The names settled between them, a fragile bridge spanning an impossible divide. She did not thank him. She was not sure if she was meant to. Instead, she turned her gaze to the land stretching ahead. "Where are you taking me?" "To my people," he said simply. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She knew what settlers said about women taken by natives, whispers spoken in firelight, in hushed, warning tones. But she also knew what had waited for her had she stayed behind: death, or worse. Chayton gave her no reassurances, no explanations. He simply turned and walked back toward his horse. The conversation was over. They rode again, deeper into the wilderness, and the land changed around them. The golden plains gave way to hills, the air cooler beneath the shade of towering pines. The scent of earth and wildflowers drifted in the breeze, mingling with the distant call of unseen creatures. It should have been peaceful, but Abigail could not relax. She was a stranger in a world that did not belong to her. As dusk settled, the group stopped in a grove of trees, where the ground was soft and the air hummed with the distant murmur of crickets. The warriors made camp with practiced ease, gathering wood, tending to their horses, preparing food. No one spoke to her. She sat apart from them, wrapping her arms around herself as the first bite of evening chill crept into her bones. The adrenaline of survival had begun to fade, and exhaustion settled in its place. A shadow fell over her. She looked up to find Chayton standing before her, a bundle in his hands. Without a word, he set it down beside her, a folded blanket and a small piece of roasted meat wrapped in leaves. Then he turned and walked away. For a moment, she simply stared at the offering. Then hunger overcame pride, and she reached for the food. The meat was rich and smoky, unlike anything she had ever tasted, but she ate every bite. The fire crackled, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow over the gathered men. She watched them from the corner of her eye, how they moved, how they spoke. Some laughed in quiet tones, others sharpened weapons or mended clothing. They were not savages, not monsters. They were simply men. And Chayton, he was something else entirely. She had never known a man like him. He commanded with few words, and when he spoke, the others listened. There was strength in him, but not cruelty. He had not hurt her, had not threatened her, had not treated her as less than any of the others. And yet, she did not trust him. That night, she lay awake beneath the blanket he had given her, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. Sleep tugged at her, but every rustling leaf, every distant howl, set her nerves on edge. Then, a noise too close, a shift in the brush beyond the trees. Her breath caught. Was it an animal? A bandit? Another enemy lurking in the darkness? She sat up, fingers reaching instinctively for the small knife at her belt. Before she could move, a hand clamped gently over her wrist. Chaitin knelt beside her, his face barely visible in the dim light. "Be still." She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "What is it?" He listened for a moment longer, then shook his head. "Only the wind." She did not believe him. But his hand remained on her wrist, his grip neither harsh nor comforting, merely firm. It was the first time he had touched her, and the warmth of his skin startled her more than the fear that had gripped her moments before. Slowly, he let go. "Sleep," he said. Then he was gone, retreating into the darkness like a shadow dissolving into the night. Abigail lay back down, her heart still unsteady in her chest. The fire crackled, the wind sighed through the trees, and above it all, the question she had refused to ask herself lingered in the air. Was she his captive? Or had he saved her? She did not know. But for the first time since the attack, she closed her eyes, and she slept. The days bled together, marked only by the endless rhythm of riding, stopping, and moving again. Abigail learned quickly how to stay in the saddle without falling, how to drink sparingly when water was scarce, how to move with the group instead of against it. But the deeper they traveled into the unknown, the more the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her. She did not know what awaited her at the end of this journey. She did not know what would become of her once they reached Chaitin's people. And yet, with every mile, the fear that had gripped her so tightly began to shift, not disappearing, but changing shape. She was still afraid. But not of him. Chaitin spoke little to her, but when he did, she listened. He was a man of few words, but his presence carried weight. She watched the way the others deferred to him, the way he moved with quiet certainty, the way he studied the land like it spoke to him in ways she could never understand. She had never met a man like him. The shift came one evening, sudden and unbidden. They had stopped by a river, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The warriors tended to their horses, their voices low, carrying in the hush of dusk. Abigail knelt at the water's edge, washing the dust from her face and hands, when she felt eyes on her. She looked up to find Chaitin watching her from where he crouched a few feet away, sharpening the blade of his knife. The firelight flickered over the planes of his face, turning his expression unreadable. "You are not as afraid as you were," he said. She wasn't sure if it was a question or a statement. She hesitated before answering. "Should I be?" His gaze held hers for a long moment before he returned to his knife. "Fear is not always weakness," he said. "But letting it rule you is." She swallowed, unsure how to respond. It was the longest conversation they had shared, and it left her feeling unsteady. That night, as she lay beneath the open sky, she realized she had not thought of running in days. The idea had not disappeared, but it no longer consumed her. She did not know what that meant. The test came without warning. They had been riding through the thick of the forest when the first arrow struck. The horse beside Abigail reared back, its rider tumbling to the ground with a sharp cry. Chaos erupted in an instant, shouts, the thunder of hooves, the sharp whistle of arrows cutting through the trees. Ambush! Abigail's horse jerked beneath her, panicked. She grabbed at the reins, heart hammering. Chaitin was already moving, his voice sharp as he barked orders to his men. A second arrow sliced through the air, missing her by inches. A man appeared from the brush, his face painted, his eyes wild with battle. He raised a weapon, and before she could think, before she could react, she felt her body move on instinct. She pulled the knife from her belt. The man lunged. She barely saw Chaitin move, but suddenly he was there. His blade flashed in the dim light, fast and deadly. The man crumpled before he could reach her, a strangled sound escaping his lips. Abigail stared, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The scent of blood hit her, sharp and metallic. Chaitin grabbed her arm. Ride. She did. The next moments were a blur of motion, shouts, the crash of bodies through the underbrush. She did not know how long the attack lasted, only that when it was over, silence fell like a weight over the forest. The attackers had fled. The warriors gathered, counting their losses. 2 men dead. Another injured. Abigail slid from her horse, her legs trembling. She felt the heat of eyes on her, but she could not look away from the blood on her hands. It was not hers, but it might as well have been. She had nearly died. Again. Chaitin stepped in front of her, his expression unreadable. You did not run. She looked up at him, something sharp and unspoken passing between them. Where would I go? He studied her, then nodded. She had answered truthfully, but it was not the full truth. She had not run because she had not wanted to, and that terrified her more than anything else. The wind carried the scent of rain as they rode deeper into the valley, the sky bruised with the promise of a coming storm. Abigail could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, like the land itself was holding its breath. The battle days before had shaken them all, and though they had left the dead behind, the weight of loss still clung to the group like a shadow. Chaitin had said little since the attack, but she could see the change in him. His shoulders carried a burden heavier than leadership, his gaze sharper, searching. He was a man who had spent his life measuring danger, reading the land, preparing for what lay ahead. But something about this, about her, had shifted the balance. She had felt it, too. She no longer saw herself as a prisoner, nor did she cling to the desperate idea of escape. Somewhere along the road, between blood and fire, she had begun to belong to this journey, even if she did not yet understand what that meant. But belonging came with a price. The storm broke as they neared the base of the mountains, rain slashing through the trees in heavy sheets. Abigail pulled her cloak tighter, the cold seeping through the fabric, but the others rode on without pause. This was not a storm that would slow them. She had grown used to the hardship. The ache in her muscles no longer made her weak. The hunger, the exhaustion, the constant uncertainty, these things had carved something new inside her. She had survived things she once believed would break her. But survival was not the same as trust. That trust was tested when the riders came. She heard the warning first, a sharp whistle from one of Chaitin's men, barely audible over the storm. Then the dark shapes emerged from the trees, fast and unforgiving, moving with the precision of men who had done this before. There was no time to speak, no time to question. Chaitin's voice cut through the chaos, a single word. Go. The warriors broke into motion, splitting off to draw the attackers away. But Abigail was not a warrior. She was a woman alone, caught between forces greater than herself. And as the first gunshot rang out, she made her choice. She turned her horse and fled. Branches clawed at her as she urged the animal forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to move. The sound of pursuit thundered behind her, hooves pounding, voices shouting. And then, she was falling. The horse reared, startled by something unseen, and the world spun as she tumbled from the saddle. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, pain exploding through her ribs. She tried to rise, but the sound of footsteps froze her. A man loomed over her, his face half hidden by the rain. His hand went to the knife at his belt. Abigail did not think. She did not have time to. Her fingers closed around a fallen branch, and she swung. The strike landed hard against his temple, and he staggered, cursing. She scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, her vision blurred by rain and fear. He was dazed, but not enough. He lunged for her again. And then, he stopped. A blade jutted from his chest, deep and merciless. Chaitin stood behind him, his face unreadable as he withdrew the knife, letting the man crumple to the earth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain beat down, washing away the blood, the fear, the moment itself. Then Chaitin turned to her, and in his gaze, she saw what she had not dared to believe. "You are not weak," he said. The words cut deeper than the knife. She had spent her life being told who she was, daughter, settler, burden. She had been shaped by expectation, by survival, by loss. But here, in the heart of the storm, she was something else. She was still breathing, still fighting, and for the first time, she did not feel afraid. She met his gaze and nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. This was not the end of the road. It was only the beginning.